The palace of the alien kingdom stood as a monumental testament to its power and grandeur. Massive walls of stone and metal gleamed in the light of the distant suns, with spires reaching up towards the stars. Inside the palace, corridors stretched on for miles, filled with alien soldiers, courtiers, and servants, all moving in synchronized silence as they went about their duties. The air smelled of incense and polished stone, and every corner seemed to hold secrets of a vast ancient empire. Among the humans sent to this alien world, none had been more important than the diplomat. His name was Alexander, but in the alien tongue it was hard for them to pronounce. He was part of a special mission, one that was meant to bridge the gap between Earth and this alien kingdom, a kingdom that had stood for millennia, its fleet dominating entire star systems. His mission was to negotiate an alliance, a feat no one had ever achieved. He had learned their language, understood their customs, and had even managed to make a few allies among the more open-minded members of the court. On this day, Alexander had been invited to tour the palace. His purpose was not only diplomatic, but also personal. He had heard rumors of the alien queen's daughter, a young princess who was said to possess unusual abilities. Her reputation as a figure of mystery had intrigued him from the moment he arrived, but he had not expected to meet her today. As he walked through one of the many grand corridors, his eyes scanning the beauty of the palace, he felt an odd presence nearby. He turned his head, and there she was. The princess. She was standing just outside a set of ornate doors, almost as if she had been waiting for him. Alexander's first thought was that she must have been a vision. The alien princess stood, tall, her delicate features framed by silver-blue hair that shimmered like starlight. Her eyes were an intense shade of violet, and her skin, pale as moonlight, glowed with an otherworldly radiance. She wore a long, flowing robe made of a material that seemed to ripple with every movement, as if it were alive. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Alexander stood frozen, caught off guard by her sudden appearance, while the princess simply watched him with an expression that was both curious and guarded. It was clear from the way she stood that she was not accustomed to human visitors, and certainly not to someone like him. She was royalty, after all. Alexander had heard that the royal family kept to themselves, hidden away from the eyes of the common folk. "You're not supposed to be here," she said softly, her voice almost musical, yet there was an edge to it. She seemed to be assessing him, trying to determine who he was and what he was doing in her part of the palace. I was just admiring the palace," Alexander stammered, still taken aback by her presence. "I didn't mean to intrude." The princess raised an eyebrow, her violet eyes narrowing slightly. "You are one of those humans who came to negotiate with my mother, yes? You are all the same, always coming, always asking for something." There was no malice in her words, but her tone suggested a deep frustration, one that Alexander could sense even without fully understanding its cause. "I am here to help your people, to form a bond between our worlds," Alexander replied, his voice steady despite the tension that seemed to be hanging in the air. "I want to offer Earth's alliance, to strengthen both our civilizations." The princess seemed to consider his words for a moment, her eyes flicking over his face as if she were searching for the truth in them. Finally, she spoke again. "You are the first human I've met who doesn't seem afraid of my mother's power." The mention of her mother, the alien queen, caused Alexander's heart to skip a beat. He had heard the stories of her strength, how she commanded the most powerful fleet in the galaxy, how her voice could change the course of history with just a few words. But he knew that behind such power often lay a complex web of politics and fear, and from the princess's words, he sensed there was more to the story. Before he could respond, the soft sound of footsteps echoed through the corridor, and a group of guards appeared at the far end. Their armor gleamed in the light, and their weapons were always at the ready, positioned to protect the princess at all costs. But as they saw her standing so close to Alexander, their movements faltered. Their eyes widened in shock, and they stopped in their tracks. "Princess," one of the guards said, his voice tinged with fear. "You should return to your chambers. It's not safe out here." The princess did not move, her gaze never leaving Alexander. For a moment there was an eerie silence. Then she stepped backward, disappearing behind him as though she were trying to hide. The guards froze, their eyes locked on her, unsure of what to do next. Alexander stood motionless, still unsure of how to react. It was as though time had stopped. The guards were supposed to protect the princess to keep her safe, but their fear of her was palpable. Even they, the highly trained soldiers of the royal court, were terrified of her power. "Leave us." The princess finally spoke, her voice low but commanding. "You are not needed here." The guards hesitated for a moment, exchanging unsure glances, but they did not argue. With a stiff nod, they turned and walked away, leaving the two of them alone in the corridor. As the sound of their footsteps faded into the distance, the princess slowly stepped out from behind Alexander. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes seemed haunted, as though she had just revealed a part of herself that she wasn't ready to share. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I don't know what came over me. I didn't mean to." "No need to apologize," Alexander interrupted, his voice gentle. "It's clear that you're not comfortable with them around." "I understand." The princess looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of gratitude and something else, something that hinted at loneliness, as though she had been waiting for someone to understand her. "You are different from the others," she said softly. "They all fear me. They fear what I might become." Alexander frowned, trying to make sense of her words. "Why would they fear you? You're a princess, a member of the royal family. You shouldn't have to hide." The princess sighed, the weight of her emotions clear in her posture. "Because I am not like them. I don't fit into their world. I have abilities they can't understand, powers that I can't control. My mother, the queen, she is the ruler of everything. But I am just a girl with powers that could destroy us all." The words were spoken with such vulnerability that Alexander felt his heart soften. It was clear that the princess had never shared these feelings with anyone. She was trapped by her birthright, by the expectations placed on her by her mother and her kingdom. "But you don't have to be alone," Alexander said quietly, taking a step closer. "No one should ever have to hide because of who they are." The princess looked up at him, and for a brief moment their gazes locked. There was a flicker of something between them, a spark of understanding, a connection that neither of them had expected. And then, before either of them could say anything more, the sound of more footsteps interrupted the moment. This time, it was not guards, but a figure in dark robes walking swiftly towards them. The princess tensed, but Alexander stepped forward, his body instinctively positioning itself between her and the approaching figure. The new arrival paused, eyes scanning the situation before nodding respectfully. "My apologies, princess. The queen requests your presence immediately." The princess's shoulders slumped. She turned to Alexander, her face hardening again, the walls she had let down reappearing. "I have to go," she said simply. "Please, don't tell anyone about what happened here." And with that she walked away, her steps echoing down the corridor, leaving Alexander standing there alone, his thoughts swirling with questions about the alien princess and the mysterious world she inhabited. But as he watched her disappear into the distance, one thing was certain. The palace was not as it seemed, and the princess was not just another royal. She was someone who had been forced into a life she did not choose, and somewhere deep down, Alexander knew he would be drawn back to her. The mission had only just begun. The days following the confrontation in the throne room seemed to stretch endlessly for Alexander. The atmosphere in the palace had changed, a heavy tension hanging in the air as the alien kingdom's leaders debated the fate of the proposed alliance. He had expected resistance from the queen, but he had not expected the personal toll it would take on her daughter. The princess's quiet strength, the courage she had shown in standing up for what she believed in, had stayed with him. Despite the queen's cold acceptance of the proposal, there were still whispers in the corridors. The alliance was far from certain. Alexander knew that the real work had just begun. And while he had no idea where he stood in all of this, he couldn't help but feel drawn to the princess in a way he hadn't anticipated. That evening, Alexander was summoned again, this time to the princess's private quarters. The message had been short and simple. I need to speak with you. No titles, no formality. Just an invitation that spoke to an unspoken understanding between them. The princess's chambers were unlike any room Alexander had ever seen. There were no grand tapestries or luxurious furnishings like those in the main parts of the palace. Instead, the room had a quiet, calming simplicity to it. The walls were lined with soft, glowing stones that illuminated the space in gentle hues of blue and purple. The furniture, though elegant, was sparse. Simple chairs and a low table adorned with books and scrolls. A large window overlooked the gardens, where the bright-colored flowers bloomed in the warm evening air. The princess was standing by the window when Alexander entered, her back to him, her posture straight and proud. Her expression was unreadable, and for a moment, he wasn't sure if he should speak or wait for her to break the silence. You've come, the princess said without turning around. Her voice was softer than it had been in the throne room, almost fragile. I'm glad. Alexander stepped closer, his footsteps echoing softly on the polished floor. You wanted to talk? She nodded but didn't turn to face him. I didn't ask for this life, Alexander. I didn't ask to be the daughter of a queen who rules through fear, or to be a pawn in a game I don't understand. Her voice wavered slightly, but she quickly regained control. I thought if I could make peace with Earth, I could show my mother that there is more to power than just strength. But I think I was wrong. What do you mean? Alexander asked, his voice gentle but filled with curiosity. You did the right thing today. You stood up for what you believe in. The princess turned slowly to face him, her violet eyes searching, his face as if looking for something, some kind of reassurance that she hadn't found anywhere else. I don't know if I did the right thing. I don't know if anyone in this palace has ever done the right thing. She paused, her expression softening as she continued. I can't keep pretending that I'm the perfect princess, the perfect daughter. I'm scared, Alexander. I'm scared of becoming like my mother, of becoming a ruler who uses fear instead of compassion. Her confession hung in the air between them, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The quietness of the room was almost suffocating, filled only by the faint sound of the wind blowing through the garden outside. I don't think you'll become like your mother, Alexander said after a long pause, his voice steady. You're not like her. I've seen it. The way you care for your people, the way you speak about peace, that's not what she wants. You want something different, and I believe you'll find a way to make it happen. The princess looked at him for a long time, her gaze soft and uncertain. Do you really believe that? That I can change things? I do, he said simply. But you can't do it alone. Her expression faltered, the walls she had built around herself beginning to crack. She looked down at her hands, her fingers gently tracing the edge of the table. I don't know how to ask for help, she whispered, almost to herself. I've always been alone in this. Even with all the people around me, I've never felt seen. Not for who I am. Alexander stepped forward, his presence comforting but not overpowering. You don't have to be alone anymore, you've got me. His words were soft but firm, the sincerity in his voice unmistakable. The princess met his gaze, her eyes searching, his face for any sign of insincerity. But there was none. His words were genuine, his offer real. I don't know if I can trust anyone else, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Not after everything that's happened. You can trust me, Alexander said, his voice steady. I'm not here for anything other than to help you, to help your people. She was quiet for a moment, her mind clearly racing as she processed his words. Finally, she nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. All right, she said, her voice growing stronger. But you have to understand something, Alexander. I don't know how to lead. I don't know how to make these decisions. I don't know how to be the person everyone thinks I am. You don't, Have to be perfect, he replied. You just have to be true to yourself. That's enough. The princess didn't answer right away, but after a moment she stepped closer to him, her eyes intense. Why do you believe in me so much? Why do you care? He looked at her, his expression softening. Because I see you, princess. I see the person you are underneath all the pressure, all the expectations. You don't have to wear a crown to be a leader. You just have to have the courage to stand up for what's right. She swallowed hard, her eyes beginning to shine with emotion. I don't know if I can do this. You don't have to do it alone, Alexander repeated. We can do it together. For the first time since they'd met, the princess's expression softened. The weight of her responsibilities momentarily lifted. There was no more fear in her eyes, no more doubt. There was just a quiet sense of understanding between them, a bond formed not out of politics or power, but of trust and mutual respect. All right, she said, her voice more determined now. Let's do this. Let's make the future we both want. In that moment, something changed. The princess, once so uncertain, now stood before him, not just as the daughter of a queen, but as a leader in her own right. And Alexander, the human diplomat from Earth, knew that this was the beginning of something much larger than either of them had imagined. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time they both felt ready to face it together. The days following the encounter in the corridor felt strangely heavy for Alexander. Though he had been assigned to negotiate an alliance with the alien kingdom, his mind kept drifting back to the princess. He had learned much in a short time, but her words, her hidden vulnerability, lingered like an unspoken promise between them. The following morning, Alexander was summoned to the grand hall where the queen would address him. He had already heard much about the alien queen's commanding presence, and it was said that few ever left her presence without being changed. With a sense of calm resolve, Alexander made his way toward the throne room. Guards lined the hall, their expressions as cold and unyielding as the stone walls surrounding them. But his thoughts weren't on them. They were on the princess, who had vanished into the shadows of the palace after their brief but meaningful exchange. The throne room was enormous, designed to make anyone who entered feel small in comparison. Tall columns of crystal stood at regular intervals, their surfaces reflecting the ambient light from overhead. At the far end, on a raised platform, sat the queen. She was as regal and imposing as the legends described, tall and graceful, with skin that shimmered like molten metal. Her eyes, cold and calculating, held a certain power that made the air in the room feel thick with tension. Human, the queen's voice rang out, smooth but laced with authority. You have come to speak of alliances and power. But tell me, why should I trust you? Why should my kingdom place its faith in your world? Alexander bowed deeply, trying not to show the hint of unease creeping up on him. He had faced many powerful leaders in his life, but this was different. The queen's eyes were like sharp blades, cutting through every word he spoke. Your Majesty, we come with open hands, not with weapons. Earth wishes only to forge a bond, one that can benefit both our peoples. We offer trade, knowledge, and military support in times of need. The queen studied him silently, her gaze unwavering. For a moment it felt as though she was measuring the very core of his being, evaluating whether he was truly trustworthy or simply another conqueror in disguise. Alexander could feel the weight of her scrutiny, and for a brief second, he doubted himself. Was his mission truly one of peace? Or was it just another layer of politics that could lead to more conflict? But then, without warning, the tension in the air broke. The doors to the throne room opened with a soft creak, and a figure entered. One Alexander had not expected to see today. It was the princess. She walked into the room slowly, her head slightly lowered, as though unsure of her place. There was something different about her today, something more deliberate in her movements. She wore a darker, more formal gown that contrasted sharply with the shimmering robes she had worn the day before. Her eyes, usually so full of mystery and vulnerability, were now set with a quiet determination. She was no longer the uncertain young woman he had met. She was a princess in every sense of the word. The queen's eyes flickered with a hint of surprise at her daughter's entrance, but her expression remained unchanged. "You are not to be here," the queen said, her voice calm but firm. The princess, however, did not flinch. She raised her head, meeting her mother's gaze with a strength that was new to Alexander. "I am here, mother, because I must be. The human is not your enemy. He is here to help, and I will stand by him." The queen's lips tightened at her daughter's defiance, but she said nothing more. She simply gestured for the princess to come closer. Alexander watched the interaction, sensing that something deeper was unfolding between the two women, something that went beyond the politics of kingdoms. The tension between them was palpable, but it was also a moment of truth. The princess was stepping into her own, finding her voice in a place where silence had been her only companion. As the princess approached, Alexander could feel the weight of the room's gaze shift. All eyes were now on her, the once hidden heir to the throne. She had always been a figure of mystery, a shadow of her powerful mother. But now, in this moment, she was more than that. She was becoming someone with her own power, someone who could command attention, respect, and perhaps even loyalty. "I stand by him because I believe in him," the princess said, her voice steady. "I believe in the possibility of peace between our worlds, and I believe that Earth is not just another threat waiting to take what we have." The queen's eyes narrowed, but there was no denying the force behind her daughter's words. For the first time, the queen did not challenge her. Instead, she leaned forward slightly as though considering her daughter's words. The room fell into a heavy silence, and Alexander, who had been watching the exchange carefully, dared not break it. "You think you know what is best for the kingdom?" The queen's voice, low and dangerous, finally spoke. "You think this human can offer us peace? What if your trust leads us to destruction?" The princess took a deep breath, her chin lifting with quiet defiance. "I think you fear what you cannot control. I think you fear change. But this kingdom, mother, needs more than just power. It needs a future. And that future cannot be built on fear alone." The queen's gaze softened ever so slightly, but her expression remained unreadable. "You are too young to understand the cost of what you ask," she said, her voice no longer as harsh but still heavy with the weight of experience. "The future of this kingdom is not something you can change overnight." The princess stood tall, her shoulders square. "Then let me help change it. Let me show you that peace is worth fighting for." For a long moment, the queen said nothing. Alexander could feel the tension in the room building again. He knew that the queen was a woman of immense power, and though her control over her kingdom was absolute, the bond between her and her daughter was fragile. The princess had just risked everything by defying her mother in such a public manner. Alexander couldn't help but wonder if he had just witnessed the beginning of a revolution within the royal family. Finally, the queen's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Very well," she said, her voice cold but not without a hint of approval. "You will stay here, human, and we will discuss your alliance, but know this: peace will not come easily. It will require more than just words." Alexander nodded respectfully, grateful for the opportunity but understanding the difficulty of the path ahead. "I understand, Your Majesty, and I am willing to do whatever it takes to prove Earth's commitment." The queen stood up, her movements graceful and regal. "We shall see, human. We shall see." With that, the queen dismissed them both, her figure retreating into the shadows of the throne room. The princess remained standing for a moment, her gaze lingering on her mother before turning to Alexander. "I'm sorry about all of that," the princess said quietly as they walked together out of the throne room. "My mother. She is not an easy person to deal with, but I had to say something. She will never understand until she sees that I am not a child anymore." Alexander nodded, understanding her words. "You did what you had to do. You were brave." The princess smiled faintly, but there was a sadness behind her eyes. "I don't feel brave, not really. I feel like I'm constantly walking on the edge, trying not to fall. It's hard to be the person everyone expects you to be. You don't have to be who they expect, Alexander said, his voice soft but sincere. You can be yourself, and that's enough. The princess's eyes flickered with something unspoken, something that felt almost like hope. Maybe, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe. As they walked further down the corridor, Alexander felt a shift between them. There was something in the princess's words that hinted at a deeper connection, something that had been formed not by politics or diplomacy, but by shared understanding. And for the first time since his arrival on the alien world, Alexander felt a spark of hope that perhaps this alliance was possible, not just for the sake of politics, but for something deeper, something more personal. The next few days were filled with uncertainty. The political landscape of the alien kingdom had shifted, but not enough to guarantee the success of the alliance between Earth and the aliens. Alexander could feel it in the air as he walked through the corridors of the palace. Something was coming, something that would test everything they had worked for. The queen was not a woman who tolerated defiance, and he knew that the princess's bold actions had only made her more wary. He had no illusions about the obstacles ahead, but for the first time since his arrival, he felt a glimmer of hope. The princess, too, seemed to have changed in the days following their conversation. She no longer moved through the palace like a shadow, her head down, her eyes avoiding the gaze of others. There was a new strength in her posture, a new resolve in her eyes. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. She had made her stand, but the queen's power still loomed large. It was late in the evening when Alexander was summoned once again. This time, the message was different. "Meet me in the garden," the princess had written simply. There was no formality, no titles, just the kind of communication that suggested a deeper connection between them. He made his way through the quiet halls of the palace, the stone walls whispering in the dim light. As he approached the garden, he saw her waiting at the far end, standing by the fountain. The sound of water trickling from the fountain was soothing, but it did little to calm the tension that had settled in Alexander's chest. "Princess," he called softly, approaching her. She turned to face him, and for a moment, there was something in her eyes that made his heart skip. It was a mixture of uncertainty and determination. She was still the same person, but the weight of her position seemed heavier now. It was as if she had taken on the burden of the entire kingdom, and the pressure was beginning to show. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice steady but carrying an underlying hint of vulnerability. "Of course," Alexander replied, his voice soft. "You wanted to talk?" She nodded, her gaze drifting to the fountain as if it held the answer she was searching for. "There's something I need to tell you," she began, her tone hesitant. "Something I've been keeping inside for a long time." Alexander stepped closer, his concern growing. "What is it?" She looked up at him then, her violet eyes searching his face. "My mother. She is not just a ruler. She is a force of nature. When she speaks, people listen. Out of fear or respect, it doesn't matter. I've seen it all my life. She controls everything in the kingdom, from the laws to the people. But I've always wondered if she is the right one to lead us." Her words hung in the air, and Alexander felt a chill run through him. "You're questioning your mother's rule?" he asked, surprised by the weight of her admission. The princess sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I've had to. I've seen too much. People are afraid of her, afraid of the power she holds. And I've started to believe that power is not the same as true leadership. My mother believes that strength is everything, that fear can make people obey. But I don't think it's enough. I don't think fear is what should guide us." "You don't have to be like her," Alexander said, his voice low but firm. "You don't have to rule through fear. You've already shown that. You stood up for what you believe in, even in front of your mother." The princess turned to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. "I want to believe that," she whispered. "But I don't know if I'm strong enough. The weight of the crown is too much. My mother doesn't show weakness. And I don't know if I can do that either. I don't know if I can be a queen who rules with kindness, who leads by example, when everything around me is so cold. You don't have to do it alone, Alexander said, stepping closer to her. I'm here. We can do this together. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression softening. There was a moment of silence between them, and Alexander could feel the distance between them shrinking. He could see it in her eyes, the longing for something more than power, the desire for peace, for a future where fear didn't control everything. But just as quickly as it appeared, the moment was interrupted. A loud crash echoed from the direction of the palace, followed by shouts and the sound of hurried footsteps. The princess's expression hardened and she immediately turned, her eyes scanning the horizon. What's happening? Alexander asked, his heart racing. I don't know, the princess replied, her voice tight. But it can't be good. Stay here. Before he could protest, she was already moving, her steps quick and purposeful as she made her way back toward the palace. Alexander hesitated for a moment, his mind racing. Whatever was happening, it wasn't good. He couldn't let her face it alone. He followed her quickly, his heart pounding in his chest. As they reached the entrance to the palace, they found the courtyard in chaos. Guards were running in all directions, shouting orders to each other. The princess's face paled as she pushed her way through the crowd, trying to get a clearer view of what was happening. In the center of the courtyard stood a group of soldiers, their weapons raised. In front of them, kneeling on the ground, was a figure that made Alexander's blood run cold. It was the queen. The princess froze, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. The queen's usual air of authority was gone, replaced by a rare vulnerability that made her seem almost human. She was surrounded by her guards, but it was clear that something had gone terribly wrong. The soldiers who had once obeyed her every command now seemed uncertain, their faces filled with fear and confusion. Mother, the princess called, rushing forward. The queen's eyes flickered toward her, a faint flicker of recognition in her gaze. Don't come any closer, daughter, she said, her voice strained but still full of authority. This is not your fight. The princess stopped, her gaze fixed on her mother. What is happening? Why are you kneeling? What has happened to you? The queen's expression twisted with a mix of anger and fear. A rebellion, she spat. A coup. The council has turned against me. Alexander stood to the side, his heart racing, as the situation unfolded. The air was thick with tension, and he could feel the weight of history pressing down on them. This was a turning point for the kingdom. The queen, once unchallenged in her power, was now at the mercy of those she had, ruled with an iron fist. The princess's voice shook as she stepped forward. How could this happen? How could you let this happen, mother? The queen's eyes softened for a moment, and for the first time, Alexander saw a hint of the woman behind the crown. I did what I thought was necessary. I did what I thought would keep us safe, but now I see that I was wrong. Let her go, the princess demanded, her voice strong. You don't have to fight anymore. You've lost. Let her go and I will lead this kingdom into a new era. The queen looked at her daughter, her gaze full of regret. For a brief moment, there was silence between them. Then, the queen slowly lowered her head, her guard stepping back as the princess approached her. You are not me, daughter, the queen said softly. But you may be the one who can save this kingdom. Tears filled the princess's eyes as she knelt beside her mother. I'll try, she whispered. I'll try to be the ruler you never could be. And for the first time in her life, the princess stood, not just as the daughter of a queen, but as the leader of a kingdom. She had the power to change the course of history, to bring peace to a fractured world. And with Alexander by her side, she knew that anything was possible. The days following the coup were tense. The princess, now the acting ruler, had taken control of the kingdom with swift action, though she could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Alexander had never seen her so determined. The young woman who had once been uncertain about her role in the palace was now a leader in every sense of the word. The rebellion, led by a faction of nobles and military commanders, had been quickly quashed. The princess's swift decision to act had earned her respect, but it also made her many enemies. The nobles who had once bowed to her mother's will were now openly questioning her ability to rule. Their fear of change had turned into distrust. For a brief moment, Alexander had feared that the chaos would spiral out of control, but the princess's resolve never wavered. She knew that the only way forward was through unity, and she was willing to do whatever it took to bring her people together. One evening, after another long day of meetings with the council, the princess invited Alexander to join her in the palace gardens. The air was cool and the stars were beginning to appear above them, their light reflecting off the polished stone of the palace. The garden was a quiet sanctuary, far from the chaos of the throne room and the council chambers. The princess was sitting by the fountain again, her fingers trailing along the cool surface of the water as she gazed into the distance. Her expression was distant, as though lost in thought. "How are you holding up?" Alexander asked gently as he approached, taking a seat beside her. She looked at him, her eyes tired but filled with a quiet strength. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "Some days I feel like I'm making progress, like the kingdom is beginning to trust me. But other days I feel like I'm on the edge of something, like everything is about to fall apart." "It's going to take time," Alexander said softly. "But you've already shown that you have what it takes to lead. You've been through so much already, and you're still standing. That says a lot." The princess sighed, her gaze returning to the fountain. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to be queen. I thought I could stay in the shadows, hidden away, far from the weight of it all. But now I have no choice. People are looking to me for answers, and I don't always know what to say." "You don't have to have all the answers right away," Alexander said, his voice steady and reassuring. "You're not alone in this. You have people who believe in you, and that's what matters." For a moment, the princess didn't respond. She simply stared at the water, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface. It was clear that the burden of leadership was a heavy one, and the pressure to live up to her mother's legacy was something she couldn't escape. "I never thought I'd be in this position," she said softly, almost to herself. "My mother, she was a force. She ruled with such strength, and I thought that's what it took to be in charge. But now I see the truth. Power isn't just about strength. It's about understanding your people, hearing their voices, and using your position to bring them together. My mother, she ruled through fear. I don't want to do that. I can't." Alexander nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You're doing the right thing," he said quietly. "Change isn't easy, but it's the only way forward. And you're right. Power isn't just about strength. It's about what you do with it, how you use it to help those around you." The princess looked at him then, her eyes searching his face for something. "Do you really believe that? That I can change things?" "I do," Alexander said with certainty. "I've seen what you're capable of. You don't have to be like your mother. You're already proving that you can lead with compassion, and that's what people need. They need someone who will listen, someone who will lead with heart." For a moment, the princess was silent, her eyes locked on his. There was a quiet understanding between them, a connection that had deepened over the days they had spent together. She had always seen him as an outsider, someone who was sent to help, but never truly a part of her world. But now, she realized, he was more than just a diplomat. He was someone who cared, someone who believed in her when even she struggled to believe in herself. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft but sincere. "Thank you for always being here, for believing in me when I didn't know if I could believe in myself." "You don't have to thank me," Alexander said, his voice gentle. "I'm here because I believe in you, and I'll be here for as long as you need me." The princess smiled then, a faint but genuine smile that made her face seem softer, less burdened. It was the first time in days that she had allowed herself to relax, to let go of the constant pressure she had been carrying. "I don't know what the future holds," she said after a moment, her gaze returning to the stars above. "But I know one thing for sure. I can't do this alone. You don't have to, Alexander replied, his voice steady and filled with conviction. I'll stand by you. We'll face it together. And for the first time since this all began, the princess felt a sense of hope. It wasn't just the hope that her kingdom would survive the turmoil. It was the hope that she too could survive. She could lead. She could change things. And with Alexander by her side, she knew that together, they could build the future they both dreamed of. The following days were filled with the hard work of rebuilding. The princess held counsel with her advisors, making decisions that would shape the future of her kingdom. She knew that the path ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that she was no longer alone in this fight. Alexander remained at her side, offering his guidance and support whenever she needed it. It wasn't easy. There were still those who opposed her, those who refused to accept the changes she was trying to bring. But the princess didn't back down. She stood firm in her convictions, and with each passing day, more people began to see that she wasn't just a figurehead, but a true leader. One morning, as the sun rose over the palace, the princess stood on the balcony, looking out over the kingdom. The horizon was bathed in a soft golden light, and for the first time in a long while she felt a sense of peace settle in her chest. The battles were far from over, but for the first time, she felt like she was on the right path. Alexander stood beside her, his presence a steady comfort. They had both come a long way since their first meeting in the palace. The future was still uncertain, but they faced it together, ready to shape the world they wanted to see. You've come a long way, Alexander said quietly, his voice filled with quiet admiration. The princess smiled, her eyes turning to meet his. We've come a long way, she corrected softly. Together. And in that moment, the future seemed full of possibility, a future that they would build with courage, compassion, and the belief that change was possible. Together they could overcome anything. Together they would build a kingdom where fear no longer ruled, but where hope and unity guided the way.